Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Horowhenua District Council for Wednesday, the 29th of September 2021. Just acknowledging councillors and staff that are present in the room, and also all those that are outside in the foyer or watching live streaming. As we are under COVID level 2, obviously, unfortunately, we cannot let the public inside the chambers. So today we have two items on our agenda, and first of all, though, Robert, could I please ask you to start our meeting?
Kia ora koutou. Tēnā koe me te rangatira, Bernie. Ki tō tātou hapuri hei muru o te mora nei. Tēnā koutou. Ki noi tātou. I te atu e kaharowa, kei te whakamoe me te mātou ki a koe tēnei ra. Nau mai hara mai kai waingi a tātou, ki te whakanui tō tātou hinengaro, te tinana, te wairu o tātou. Anei rā tō tātou kōrero wānanga e pāne ki tō tātou hāpuri o te roho nei o Horowhenua. Tēnei te mihi aro ki a koe te atua, tēnā te mihi, tēnā te mihi, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Robert, thank you. So we do have an apology for lateness for Councillor Allen. Can I so move? Seconded, Councillor Jennings. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. We do also have some items of public participation that relate to the item regarding the Three Waters reform. So we will wait till we get to that item and then read those to you. You may have received them earlier. Any other late items? Being none, any declarations of interest?
Yeah, just consistent with previous declarations, I'll be declaring a conflict of interest in relation to item 6.1, and so I won't participate in that discussion.
Thank you. And just for clarification, item 6.1 is the Economic Development Services report. Thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, so moving to 6.1 on page 7, which is the Economic Development Services. Could I move receipt of that report? And a second, please. Councillor Tukapua, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So the motion in front of us is 3.3, that the Horowhenua District Council endorses the Economic Development Service Agreement with the Horowhenua Company Limited for the term 1st of October 2021 to 30th of June 2024. Any debate or discussion on the item? Councillor Tukapua.
Just two questions. Is that okay? Okay. So the first one is page 10, and where there's mention of the development of a Horowhenua brand identity. I wondered who might be feeding into this, and would there be a session with council before it's finalised? Or do they already know our views in that space?
Through you, Your Worship, may I answer that? In response to that question, absolutely there will be a discussion with council. Part of the role is to develop, first of all, the scope for that brand identity. Just to be clear, the brand identity work is not part of the contract that is proposed with the Horowhenua Company Limited. That will be a piece of work that we as council need to define and then engage the appropriate support to do that. That would be a separate piece of work that we will bring back to you. It's the events strategy that is part of the contract with the Horowhenua Company. the funding that council allocated through the LTP was to cover both the event strategy and the Horowhenua identity work, but not necessarily dedicated to be with the Horowhenua Company Limited.
Second question is actually follows on from that around the event strategy and a cost of one-off 80,000 in preparation for that. I just wondered, I mean, it was sort of mentioned through the LTP process, but what would we be, what can we expect in the type or size of events or the level of return based on that investment for a plan?
So again, through you, Your Worship. So the scope for the piece of work that's been requested from the Horowhenua Company aligns to what was covered in the destination management strategy. So the scope is where they've been asked to explore the iconic events which are recognised within the Horowhenua, which the submissions to the LTP from submitters also outlined. It's for them to look at the community and economic benefit of those events and then include, based on that, an operating model, resourcing costs and implementation for those if they were to form part of the future of an economic strategy. So the piece of work is to outline what would an event strategy look like, what events would it include, if that was to proceed, how would it be governed, how would it be administrated, what would be the cost, benefit, return. That strategy then needs to come back to this council to consider. Council would also be part of a stakeholder to that strategy. And then it would be about, from there, looking at how that is implemented, acknowledging that council would not necessarily be the implementer to what that strategy identifies. There would be other parties. So this will involve the Horowhenua Company, who do have this piece of work, undertaking all of that to bring back for council to consider. Council will then have a call on the implementation and as to how that proceeds. However, we already know with a number of those events, they're not governed by the council. They're actually community events, so it's whether or not council choose to put structures in place to support that, and then whether you would see a return on that investment. So for the $80,000, really what your return is for that to be undertaken external to our resource, being able to do it, and providing the community with a platform that's currently missing. So the LTP submissions, there was 2 of them. The scope's been written largely around the debate that council had at the time in considering both of those submissions. I can provide you with a copy of the scope if that would be useful.
No, I accept your description or explanation around that, and I certainly have confidence in the company delivering on these great things. I note the 12 activity areas and then the new sorts of key deliverables mentioned in the report, and certainly they've proven themselves to this date, and yeah, I'm satisfied. I just want clarification around a couple of those things. And there's obviously on the page 11 the ways in which we'll hear from them in the future. Yeah, monitoring. Thank you.
Just noting, thank you, Councillor Tukapua, that there is a slight change to those considerations in terms of how they will report back to us, that they will provide an economic dashboard that's not monthly as in the agenda, it is going to be quarterly, and that the update on progress at a council meeting will be on a as time to time as requested, not as on a biannual basis. Understood? Thank you. Councillor Keru.
Aroha mai, I was just trying to find the portion that I want to talk to, but it was just really just about the, in the report it talked about Māori development, engagement of businesses and things like that. And I'm just trying to find that in the document, but I haven't succeeded in doing that. Is there, I just wondered whether is there a strategy or plans going forward and how to develop that in more engagement?
Through you, Your Worship. So to respond to the question, Councillor Ketu, we have within this contract been quite explicit in terms of the collaboration that we are seeking from the partner, in this case being the Horowhenua Company, with our iwi partners. The scope at this stage is for them to develop those relationships in the first place. So we've actually already commenced, and for elected members' awareness, the Horowhenua Company have met to date with Dai from Ōpoko Tribal Authority, and we also have just connected the Chief Executive with the Acting Chief Executive for the Runanga, which is Rarite, to commence the partnership. Then what we're looking for is for them to have those discussions as partners with regards to the aspirations of iwi within the district, and for then, as part of the next 3-year term, for that to be part of the annual agreement that we have in setting what the service level expectation would be. It is fair to say, and you will hear later as part of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee discussion, I'm sure, that has been an area that has not been covered well in the prior contract. So we haven't set an explicit scope for that partnership. They need to form their own partnership initially, and then through those aspirations we'd be looking to define through the future service level agreements what that would look like, and at this stage that's where that is sitting.
Any further questions, clarity? Okay, so could I have a mover and a seconder for 3.3, please, that the Horowhenua District Council endorses the Economic Development Service Agreement with Horowhenua Company Limited for the term 1st of October 2021 to 30th of June 2024. Councillor Bishop, seconded Councillor Isaacs. Any further debate? Discussion?
Yeah, I think just that Your Worship, that the significance of this, I think, deserves some comment. I think there's a degree of uncertainty for some time around this economic development package, where it sat and who was going to deliver that. I just want to acknowledge the work that's gone into this, and I think the move through the trust to the Horowhenua Company to deliver is a positive one. I think if you see all the performance areas listed there, and then the report that's in the FAR committee this afternoon, I think outlines what is in store for Horowhenua. I think it's very exciting. So I just wanted to comment on that and acknowledge the good work that's been put into this to get this outcome. So well done, everyone. Thank you.
Endorse those comments. I think it is a great step forward, and we've come a long way since we've initiated the first contract for sure. Councillor Tukapua, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just to extend on what I've already said around the events strategy. I mean, what gives me confidence is there's some really smart people involved in this, and I wouldn't like to see, from a prolonged COVID thing where, everything continues to get cancelled. Events, I've certainly been on the end of that and trying to get your money back for tickets and so so I'm sure they'll cover that. And yeah, just to say that, at least expressed through the LTP, we don't just want to support the good events that exist, like the ones that support our food industry. But, seeing the return of events like the hot air balloons, where community genuinely enjoyed that, and it's it's quite unique, and you can't fly those all over New Zealand, so it's special to have that here. But also we want to see new events, things that haven't been done here before. So yeah, all the best to them, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Also, just noting that Councillor Jennings was not present through that vote and discussion. Okay, so moving to the Three Waters reform, the endorsement of feedback to government. Before we start talking to this agenda item, I'd just like to read the public participation notices that we've received today, and the inability of those people to actually be present publicly means that we do have to read these. So the first one is from Lindsay Berryman. It says, Dear Council, as a recent new resident and current ratepayer, I would like to express my concern on the proposal to sell district assets to the government for management by a third unelected and unaccountable party. These assets have been acquired, maintained and managed by the council on behalf of local residents and ratepayers for generations, and to be offered pennies in the pound to have these removed shows a total disregard to democracy and is nothing short of blatant asset theft. Agreeing to this will likely also reduce the council's ability to borrow money for future projects, borrowing being based on the asset base. The paltry amount that is being offered by government for these assets will not provide any long-term infrastructure improvements elsewhere, either now or in the future. I strongly recommend council follow in the steps of other local authorities and reject the government's offer. The second one is from Glenn Radovan. To the Horowhenua District Council, I am against this reform and a transfer of public assets. This proposal is very vague and generalised. Our council and community need to be in control of our three waters. Horowhenua has its own challenges and plans now and for the future. The initial proposed $296 million just for a transitional period is a huge cost when the councils around the country could use it to further implement their local improvements. The idea to give a new entity another $1.5 billion so that they can get started, then find a way to borrow an uncertain amount to continue the works, which are covering huge areas of the country, is madness. The government should raise standards across the board / country when it comes to our water, then invest in the local governing bodies to make the improvements to align with those guidelines / standards. Any other choice, in my opinion, is just a waste of taxpayers' money and time. Not to mention we cannot be confident on the future costs of ratepayers once the proposal is implemented. I will be tuning in to the meeting tomorrow. Thank you for your time. Number 3 is from Diane Brown. Governance team, good afternoon. I append a recent article published in a local farming newspaper. It shows the extent of opposition and risks with the current proposals, and I request this be circulated to all councillors as part of their information pack for the 29 September meeting. May I suggest that such a major proposal requires considerably wider consultations with all interested parties before it is adopted. The attachment is a letter from David Haynes, New Zealand Federation of Freshwater Anglers, which is titled Fusing Public Assets, a Risky Move. This opinion of the Three Waters reform rightly identifies the confiscation of ratepayers' infrastructure into unelected agencies. It has little to do with provinces being taxed to shore up Auckland's and Wellington's water woes. That is just the old rural versus urban trot. Three Waters takes publicly owned assets, consolidates them into 4 enterprises, all with healthy income streams, strong cash flows and balance sheets stuffed with valuable assets. Add to this our dependency on this national strategic utility and hey presto, an extremely attractive business for sale to wealthy overseas investors at some point in the future. No surprise that Deloitte, the world's favourite privateers, found a compelling business case for consolidating our water infrastructure providers. We only have to look at what happened to the 10 UK regional water authorities privatised by the Conservative government in 1989, sold for £7.6 billion and now owned by banks, hedge funds, sovereign funds and businesses from pension funds, Japan, Canada, France, Malaysia, Singapore, the US, Germany, UAE, Kuwait, Australia and of course China. At the point of sale, the government, i.e. the taxpayer, kindly took on the collective water authority's debt of $5 billion to sweeten the deal. The UK National Audit Office calculated that consumers' water bills rose 40% above inflation since the privatisation. The results of this privatisation speak volumes. Leaks reduced a mere 4% in 20 years to 25% of water currently lost to leakage. Prosecution for pollution events peaked in 2018. Profits go to pay dividends rather than infrastructure investment, and so new mains, sewage pipes in London are being funded by low-interest loans from the government. As if the pill isn't bitter enough, our government paid the England and Wales water regulator to measure the performance of our water utilities. This is a scheme right out of Margaret Thatcher's playbook. It offers a future government access to a quick sale to pay down government debt, our most successful industry, which was $40 billion in 2011 and forecast to rise to $190 billion by 2025. The Three Waters advertisement states, "Our trout will be happy," and excuse the language, my arse they will. The last one is from the Horowhenua District Residents Ratepayers Association, and says that significant investment is needed across the country to address the many issues of water quality in New Zealand. Without a national and coordinated approach, the costs to householders will be high. Access to safe drinking water and sanitation is considered a basic human right. However, many New Zealanders cannot be confident that their drinking water is safe. Across New Zealand, there is considerable variety keeping drinking water standards at a safe level, and in parts of New Zealand, poor compliance with water standards. Horowhenua District drinking water issues. 1. This has shown up every year with water restrictions most summers, and the water supply issue after the heavy rain late in June, when Levin was very, very close to running out of drinking water due to contaminated water supply. 2. Water quality in streams and river in Horowhenua is very poor, with 3 of the 4 worst streams and rivers in the country, including the Arafota and Pārtiki streams to the north and south of Lake Horowhenua. The Manawatu River is the dirtiest in the southern hemisphere. 3. Road and industrial runoff is poorly monitored and goes to the lowest point, the lake. This is the next big issue that we will all have to deal with, especially as the Queen Street drain still has no consent to run into the lake. The Three Waters proposal will help small districts get the benefit of scale. There is no way the small Horowhenua community could afford to do what needs to be done for its future well-being, especially given the pace of local development. Horowhenua would benefit greatly from being able to leverage the scale and financial capacity of the 4 proposed new water boards to address the growing challenges associated with the stormwater system as a result of the continuing expansion of urban areas, increasing frequency of high-intensity rainfall events, and a growing awareness of the environmental impact of stormwater runoff on fresh and coastal water bodies. The health impacts of the current Three Waters failing system have significant flow-on effects from an economic perspective. 1. Cases of waterborne gastrointestinal illnesses have been calculated to have cost New Zealanders $496.1 million over 40 years, principally in terms of healthcare and lost productivity. 2. In 2006, the Ministry for the Environment estimated that waterborne disease cost New Zealand $25 million a year. 3. The economic cost of the Havelock North outbreak to the country was calculated to be $21 million. Transformative change is required, not piecemeal solutions. The nature and extent of the challenges facing the system and the root causes of these problems mean we cannot expect the current system of service delivery to respond to meet these challenges, particularly in the comprehensive, widespread and sustained manner that is required. Most councils and communities will not have the funding or the operational capacity to eliminate the infrastructure deficit and meet future growth requirements. Experience over the past 30 years also indicates that widespread improvements, particularly through voluntary change and collaboration, are unlikely. Maori-owned lake and waterways have been contaminated through poor management and the use of these waterways to take massive inputs of silt, heavy metals, fertilisers and pesticides, to name a few. As a result, Kaiawa and Kaimana kai no longer thrive and in many cases are likely to become extinct in the near future. This has meant nearly all safe cultural kai gathering has gone for how long we don't know, but we hope not forever. The Three Waters will help inform change, for example by sharing information about contamination across regional and district boundaries. Farms and lifestyle blocks are now having to review their waterways. They have to employ an appropriate expert to report on how they are managing them. Weka and Hardra have been working to effect change over the last 30 years and are still trying. Nothing has really changed. In fact, it keeps getting worse. This is because district councils are reluctant or not informed enough to change their behaviours and encourage their local businesses to do so too. Regional councils are also under-resourced and too weak to enforce higher standards. We recommend that we should support this Three Waters initiative because, one, over the last 30 to 50 years, the current system we have of elected representatives, both in our district council and our regional council, have not managed to stop the pollution of our water and waterways. Monitoring over this time shows it has got worse. Two, many businesses and HDC have no legal consent to do what they are doing, and the regional council, the watchdog, has not stopped those non-compliances. The Queen Street drain, Levin's landfill and our market gardens are just a few things operating without official compliance or consent. Three, if the Three Waters are taken away from district and regional councils as part of the review of local government, there will have to be some amalgamation of district councils. We strongly agree with this, as small councils have too small a revenue base to manage the Three Waters efficiently and effectively. We are disappointed at Palmerston North's recent announcement about their new wastewater treatment plant, with most of the more highly treated wastewater still going into the Manawatu River. This is unacceptable in the 21st century and is still a cheap option which does not fully factor in the cost to nature. Our Horowhenua coastline shellfish beds and beaches will continue to receive this wastewater because the water from rivers onto the west coast all heads south because of the prevailing wind. We see this as just another example of a short-sighted decision with no real thought to the future of water and of human and other animal health. We would like the option of the Three Waters being sold in the future to be taken out of the options presented. Hardra and Weka think that this initiative is our only choice for the future of healthy, safe water in New Zealand. Excuse me while I have a drink. Are there any comments or Councillor Isaacs?
Yes, Your Worship. Could you just confirm who was that last one from? Was it the rate?
Horowhenua Residents and Ratepayers Association. Yeah.
Horowhenua Residents and Ratepayers. Thank you.
Just for the record, to the Chief Executive, can you just confirm, in one of those submissions that was read out, there was a reference to the June rainfall event and the Levin's drinking water being contaminated. And I was really concerned to hear that because that's not my understanding of what actually happened. And I was wondering whether you could just clarify exactly what the position was, just so that everyone is clear around that suggestion.
Through you, Your Worship, just in response to that question, just an answer to that, during the June flood event, the water treatment plant was shut down due to the turbidity of the Ohau River, which is really where our raw water source comes from. There was absolutely no contamination to the treated water as it was stored in our reservoirs.
Thank you. Okay. So moving on to page 13 of our agenda. Could I first of all just remove receipt of the report? Councillor Jennings, Deputy Mayor Mason, all those in favour? Thank you. So I had previously canvassed the views of elected members in terms of how we would approach this agenda item, and had asked if they were comfortable that we look at all items in from 3.3 to 10 in one block. And the response that I had was that, yes, that would be the preferred option. So I'm looking, therefore, to seek your views and opinions on that feedback that is attached to the report. And if you substantially agree or not agree to it.
Will there be an opportunity for questions, staff first, or did you want to make a decision around the approach first?
Yeah, let's approach first, and then we'll have time to ask questions of the staff, yes. So are there any opposing views to the process of doing it in block? There appear to be none, so that's the way, okay. So in that case, Councillor Tukapua.
So I've had a brief discussion around this, and sort of the thinking was if we do it in block and we only get, say, 5 minutes each to speak, is limiting in terms of if we took one at a time when we could actually speak a little bit more in detail on each topic. So up to the rest of us, but if you can sum it all up in less than 5 minutes, then so be it. But would you indulge us if we went 7 minutes? Is my question.
I suppose what I'm seeking is whether there is substantial difference to the feedback report that we have attached to the agenda, and whether we're going to then therefore argue each theme in terms of the wording of what's in those themes, and that I'd prefer that substantially, if we could reach a consensus, that sort of feedback is where we sit as a table, or we need to strengthen or minimise that or delete, that is the approach that I'd like to hear from you. I don't really want to get into I disagree with that sentence and I'd like to have that sentence. And I know Councillor Jennings has got an alternative, but it is a complete package rather than individual themes. Councillor Allen.
So speaking to it, Mr. Mayor, and just to share in public the feedback I gave to you, I'd like it to be a two-step process. The first step being where councillors have the opportunity to respond to the big picture, which is what this report contains. The report talks about the Three Waters issue, and then it breaks it down under a number of headings. So the first step I would like to be for councillors to talk about how they sit around the Three Waters proposal and reflect our views on the workshops we've held. As a second step, under the blue highlighted items, where we come down to particular feedback and recommendations, is the opportunity then to talk about whether we want to amend those recommendations, which is around the specifics. So I seek support around the table as to whether that's the way people want to go, and if it is, I'm happy to lead off.
Views?
Yep, I support that approach.
You support that approach?
I'm happy to foreshadow. I'm comfortable with that, acknowledging that my issue in terms of what's currently on the table is I agree with the individual themes. My feedback is really about the more substantive front end position. So
Yep. Understood. Councillor Tukapua,
You mentioned Sam having an alternative draft of sorts. Would that need to come ahead of this? Because we could potentially go through the report and then amend it or adjust it at the end. Is that still? Still able to do it in that way?
Yeah. It was my intention to ask Councillor Jennings to propose his amendment, if you like, to the feedback first. But I'm agreeing with, in terms of Councillor Allen's approach, that everybody get that opportunity to put their stance around the higher level issues. And if then Councillor Jennings wants to promote his amended report. Yeah. Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I just want to
Support that.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Robert, are you, Councillor Kedder, are you comfortable with that approach? Thank you.
I am.
Councillor Mitchell, are you comfortable with that approach?
I am.
Thank you. Councillor Kay Simmons? Thank you. Councillor Bishop? Thank you. Deputy Mayor Mason? Thank you. So, and I am quite flexible in terms of people speaking time. Obviously, this is an issue of some significance, and every councillor should have the opportunity to put their views and opinions as they see. So, who would like to start? Oh, sorry, questions. Yes, let's. Are there any questions of officers first?
I have three, lots of questions, but I'll just give you three. Could you please confirm whether there are any non-negotiables in this proposal, and if so, what are they? The government's proposal, non-negotiables.
So we also have Chris Purchase on Zoom. So Chris is from Tonkin and Taylor on behalf of Local Government New Zealand, and he's been working with us. So he is here to provide some technical expertise as well. So we will hand this over to Chris.
I guess one quick thing I'd note though is in terms of, I think when you mentioned non-negotiables in terms of the council's views, what we've talked about is in terms of, I guess, when we've talked about it with you is the prioritisation and making sure that the infrastructure that this council needs to provide for the district into the future in terms of what we've planned is provided as part of this proposal so that this district can grow in the way that it's intended to. That would be one key non-negotiable that I guess that has been talked about for this council.
Yeah, awesome, thank you, I get that, but the proposal from government, as far as I'm aware, that they have three non-negotiables, and just for public view, what are they?
So I can step in and offer some comment here. So there's a number of ideas that have been put on the table by government. I think it's pretty clear
Chris,
from, yep.
Can you turn your sound up or have it closer to your mouth? You're just a little bit muffled.
I can too. Is that a little bit better? Not much better?
Just the same.
Just the same. See if there's anything else I can do with my audio. Sorry.
Try now, Chris.
Is that a little bit better? That seems to be it. Don't have anything else that I can adjust here. Still not clear enough? No.
Can you just talk really loud?
I can try and talk really loud. I can actually just try one more thing because my headphones are being a little bit crackly. See if that's worked. Am I coming through at all then? Is that any better? I'll assume not. Okay, shall I fire ahead? Can people hear me if I talk as loudly as I can without annoying my workmates? Okay, so look, I think there's a number of things that are driving things from government, as I'm sure most of the councillors are aware.
Chris, Chris, we can't hear you, so I think we're just going to have to carry on and come back.
What I might try to do is come out and come back in again, see if that fixes things.
Yeah.
Second question? This through you, it might be for David or infrastructure manager maybe. My question is, do we manage our water assets well? And could you please give us, I guess, a snapshot of the condition and performance of our 3 water activities? Again, for those in the public that will view now or later.
A difficult question to answer in terms of providing some factual information to you, because most of that information is actually in our asset management plans, and we have assessments in those asset management plans and the infrastructure strategy, as well as the RFI information that we provided to the Department of Internal Affairs around the assessment of our assets, both in terms of its, I can't remember the right word that was used. There was a grading, I think, that was used to actually assess the level that we were actually saying that our assets were at. Look, in terms of the detail, I do not have that information unless, Ashley, you're able to answer specifically the answer to that question. I don't think we can generalise. I think we've got to be quite specific.
So there are some gradings that's provided in the infrastructure strategy. So for treatment plants, it is C, grade C. Grade C in terms of confidence. What sort of information do we have? And in terms of reticulation, we have got grade B. So there are quite lots of improvement plans underway to lift the grade C to grade B.
So just for clarity, when we presented the infrastructure strategy and the asset management plans to council prior to Christmas of last year, we indicated that the information that we had around the condition ratings of the individual component parts of our treatment plants could have been better. Thus, we actually assessed it as a C. And remembering that we also indicated to council that we were going to undertake some work to determine what provide better information to assess what was required as far as upgrade of the treatment plants. But the main area that we had focused on was around our reticulation, and on the basis of a B grading, that is pretty good.
So in short answer to, do we manage water assets well, is a yes?
We can always do better, and it's always, we can be better based on the information that's available to us, but at this point in time, yes, we do manage our assets well.
Okay. Third and final question is around the compensation for our assets. Jacinta isn't sure. So what is the value of our assets? What are we being offered to purchase these? And how much of the existing debt will be transferred?
The exact value I'll look up for you and maybe come back to it straight after the next question, if that's okay, because I've got it sitting here. In terms of the asset base, though, versus what we will receive back from the Crown, it hasn't been decided for sure. What's the proposal at this stage, and the conversations that have been had are that the council will receive an amount equal to the level of debt that it has for its 3 waters, which is currently for this council is around 57 or 58 million. The value of the council's water assets is significantly more than that, in the hundreds of thousands. I'll confirm around 500,000 or 600,000, I believe, but I'll confirm that for you shortly. I'll just grab that information.
Millions.
Not thousands.
It's accountant speak for millions.
Saying $500 million, it sounds a lot better.
Any further questions?
Yeah, just one question specifically on the draft letter that's in the agenda paper. There's reference to a Tasmanian water model, and essentially our response suggests to the government that they should explore that as a potential or suitable model. And I just wanted to, I guess, get some further advice around what that model actually entails, because it's not something that we discussed at any detailed level during our sort of workshops or up until today. And I just wondered if it sort of hits the themes in terms of that we raised prior to this meeting, and that's why that's being put forward as a sort of a possible model that possible alternative model that we should be thinking about.
I'll let Chris jump into it when he gets back on, but from my understanding when we discussed it, the main item in regards to it was around the representation. So what I understand was that each council was represented from that perspective, and that's why that was proposed as a good idea.
Councillor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jacinda, my question is around ownership of the assets, and I know that's been through this process quite a moving target. But just for the public, this proposal is not just about current assets. For me, it's also about future assets, which our ratepayers will be paying for through their charges. Where does the future ownership of future assets in the ground sit?
I'll just quickly, Chris may want to jump in on this one, but to round off your question in terms of the asset value, it's currently sitting at around 550 million. So that's the value of the council's 3 water assets. And in terms of the borrowings that we have associated with those is around 57 million. So in terms of where we've done, in terms of assets have increased significantly in value though, that we saw as part of our last 3 waters valuation. And Councillor Bishop, in terms of your question around, my understanding from the proposal, and Chris may want to jump in, is that they've talked about council ownership in terms of assets transferring, or that the community themselves will own the assets, but that will be via the new entity. So that effectively it would be community that would own them, not unlike a community member owns a hospital now, from that perspective. So that the ongoing investment will be through that new entity, and that ownership would continue through that new entity. But Chris, do you want to jump in at all?
Yeah, can you hear me a little bit better now? Is that coming through a bit clearer?
Yeah.
That's good. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on the ownership structures. I'm not sure that anyone is, because it's a little bit complex. But my understanding is that as a local authority, you will have ownership of the entity alongside the other constituent local authorities, and that entity will own the assets. So that's kind of the chain of ownership, if you like. So the logical extension of that is any new assets created by that entity and delivering the 3 water services will be owned by that entity, which is in turn owned by the local authorities. That's the model as it's being put forward at the moment.
So Chris, have you got an idea of the other questions that people asked, or do you want those?
Sorry, no, I've missed a number of those.
The first question, Chris, was around the 3 non-negotiables that the Crown have as part of the reform.
Yeah, I was just referencing back to my notes to see if I could clarify exactly where they were. I mean, there's, and I didn't do too well on that, but look, the bottom lines that I'm reading from government are that the existing level of investment that's planned is not adequate to meet the requirements as they see them. So that investment needs to increase. Clearly, there's requirements that are articulated in the water services bill from a water supply perspective that need to be delivered on, and that's one of the drivers for increasing investment. And they've also been very, very clear about assets remaining in public hands. So privatisation or sale of assets is off the table. Are probably the three ones that I would kick off with.
Can I just test my understanding of what Chris has just covered off? My understanding of the three non-negotiables that underpin the proposed reform package are absolute compliance with current and future standards. Second, balance sheet separation. And three, co-governance, or the language actually may be partnership with iwi. That is my understanding of the three non-negotiable parts of the design of the reforms. But if I'm not correct on that, I'd appreciate to be corrected.
So, I mean, those are all very clearly articulated drivers for the reforms. I think it's been very difficult to figure out what are the things that are not movable. For example, there are discussions ongoing in terms of the exact details of the governance framework, and it's worth reiterating that the phase we're in at the moment is a proposal that has been put forward that has some detail, but is largely at principles level, and government is actively seeking feedback on those principles and the details where they've been provided. But you're right around balance sheet separation, because that is seen as a mechanism for addressing funding shortfalls in the current model. The co-governance is I agree, again, is a key underlying principle for the delivery of the reforms, and absolutely compliance with the drinking water standards and future standards for both drinking water, but wastewater and stormwater discharges as well.
Sorry, and just one final question, just to supplement some of the questions that's already been asked. In terms of the, Jacinta, you've indicated that we have a current book value of $550 million worth of Three Waters assets. Is it your understanding, if the reforms did proceed, that those assets are therefore transferred to Entity C, and that council gets zero in terms of compensation for those assets? There's an amount of $57 million that will come off our balance sheet in terms of debt, but there is no other money that is then paid to council directly related to the assets.
In terms of, just to be clear, the borrowings, from my understanding, the borrowings at the moment, the level of borrowings that the council has would be transferred, which is directly related to that asset. But in terms of that asset, there is some conversation about the reserves that have been collected for those assets. That hasn't yet been clear what the government's proposal is relative to those. So that would be where we would be collecting money through rates and towards future renewals of assets, and that sits in a reserve for when the renewals happen. The conversation about reserves, some initial conversation from the government has been that they won't compensate councils for reserves. For us, that isn't a significant amount. It's in the sort of less than $5 million. But in terms of your question, it would be just the repayment of debt that we understand. In addition, there is the proposal around the better off funding, so then almost $20 million that we're being proposed to receive, and also then the no worse off funding, which is around $2 million that we're proposed to be receiving. There is conversation about other potential funding, but in regards to specifically related to the assets, the payment for our borrowings is all that's being confirmed at this stage.
Can I just confirm just something you said, just so that I'm not an idiot, is in relation to the reserves? Are you saying that amount of, say, $5 million would transfer in addition to the assets, or that's a liability sitting on our current books that we wouldn't be compensated for? I'm sorry, I just wasn't clear on which it is.
No, that's fine. So that would mean if we've been collecting money through rates and that's sitting there, there has been some conversation that councils wouldn't be compensated for that, or may need to pay that back to the Crown as well for money that they've received. That hasn't been confirmed yet, though. But for us, that isn't a significant factor.
Councillor Cason.
Just a question for Chris, because I couldn't quite hear before, but are you able to just repeat what you said about the privatisation part, please?
So, I mean, fundamentally, privatisation is off the table. So there's a excuse me, there's a number of protections that government's designed into the proposals as they currently stand that are intended to make privatisation, if not impossible, very difficult. So that relates to the approvals required from the representative group, and also I believe a referendum requirement as well. So the intention is to make privatisation, as I say, extremely difficult, if not impossible.
I'm sorry, Chair, I need to just follow up to that question as well, if you don't mind, because again, that doesn't align with my understanding, which is that unless the government, as part of its legislative package to implement the proposed reforms, were to achieve a 75% majority in Parliament, those protections that the government is proposing could be undone with a simple parliamentary majority, so 51%. So in terms of those protections, yes, they might look good on paper, but in terms of a parliamentary majority, they could be removed essentially with that parliamentary majority, no matter whatever the government's decision of the day is.
Did you hear that question, Chris? And can you confirm?
Oh, look, I did. I mean, I think you're right. I think there's nothing to prevent a future government taking a different view. So the existing government has made their position quite clear and attempted to put in protections, but those are limited by one government can't define what the next government will do. So
I suppose the follow-on from that is that the government of the day has the ability to remove any legislation that's currently in play, regardless of what it is. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. So I just want to ask a question about funding for the services that the new entity would provide. So at the moment, under a council regime, only those ratepayers that receive the services of water, wastewater and stormwater pay for those services. Is there any certainty in a model about how the new entities would be funded? For example, is it possible that people that don't receive those services would also be helping to contribute towards the funding?
So there's been no details given on the charging models or the funding models for those entities, apart from the fact that they would have the ability to charge ratepayers or householders directly, or users of those services directly. So you could take that to imply that only those benefiting from the services will be charged, but that hasn't been clarified explicitly.
So just to add to that, it depends, I guess, at the moment. Water Carrion is so absolutely that entity, if it had rating powers, as this council has, would have the ability to influence the method. So whether it was partially fixed, fully volumetric, in terms of water metering, or capita value or land value. I mean, the water care model at the moment is a water meter based, where they have a level of fixed charge and a volumetric charge, which you would think would be likely, but there's been, as Chris said, no definite model confirmed.
Councillor Tukupa.
Yeah, supplementary question to follow up on some of what Sam was asking, Chris, if you don't mind. Just back to the privatisation and that parliamentary majority to overturn, what is your advice, I guess? What is the likelihood of that happening versus if water assets stayed in the control of 67 councils, the likelihood of privatisation in that way is, what's your view?
Look, I'm probably not well qualified to comment on that. Others will have more familiarity with the provisions within the Local Government Act, which I think puts some limits on council's ability to divest Three Waters assets. But apart from that, yeah, that's very, very hard to make a comment either way.
Okay, and the last thing you mentioned, a referendum. So does it trigger that in the current proposal?
So the way that it's been phrased in the proposals as they currently stand is that there would be protections built into legislation, remembering that the legislation for the establishment of these entities has not been drafted or certainly hasn't been shared. But the suggestion is that there would be a need for a vote, a 75% majority vote from the representative group, which is 50-50 local government and iwi representatives. And then it would need to be put to a referendum with a similar 75% majority required. So that's one of the protections that they have in place.
Any further? Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris. We got there in the end. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
Is there anything officers wish to add before we kick off? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you to all three. All right. So we now get into discussion and views on the feedback itself. And there will be the opportunity for everybody to contribute if they wish. But knowing that Councillor Jennings does have an alternative package that I assume has been distributed to councillors. Councillors?
Yeah, so I can confirm that it's substantially the same as the version as I circulated by email last week,
Right.
With some slight refinements. And so essentially what it does is it takes the current proposed feedback in the agenda, reorders some of them, doesn't really substantively change the themes, but it certainly adds some stronger positions up front of the letter.
So it may be a good opportunity to put those forward, that substantive change up front, so that councillors understand the difference in terms of where the feedback in the agenda item and your feedback in terms of that upfront strengthening message.
That's absolutely, so I'm happy to put it forward formally by way of a motion if you'd like, or I can we can follow the approach of
So, following advice from the Chief Executive, it might be, I think, a good idea to actually have a discussion around that substantive change or strengthening of the message that you wish to be. There may be some discussion and some questions about that, and then the opportunity to then formally propose an amendment to the feedback that we're doing. Councillor Allen.
I raise a point of order.
Yes.
This is a substantial document. It was circulated via email to councillors. I, for one, had no idea it was going to appear as a formal proposal on the table today, but more importantly, the public has not had access to this document. It's really important when we're dealing with what is a substantial reordering of our position that the public are involved in that process in the same way that they are with the formal report on the table for the council meeting today. So this should have had adequate public notice so the public could have seen that as a proposed position and could have had the opportunity therefore in their feedback. It's different from amendments. The difference for me is between amendments to a council item versus a substantial reordering of a position. So that's my concern.
Can I just comment on that? So, look, my position was that in terms of the draft that forms part of the agenda paper, I do not agree with what it currently says in terms of, because it lacks some things that I think it needs to say. So my intention was to come along to today's meeting to explain my position and also then outline what I would like to see added to the current version, and I was going to do that by way of either offering this as an alternative self-contained package, or use some of the language in it to frame the discussion around the type of stronger language that I'd like to see. So, I mean, maybe if to address Councillor Allen's concerns, we start with, I guess, councillors responding to the paper that is on the agenda paper, and then we go from there.
Yeah, look, I am comfortable with that, but the process that I believe we have to follow is what is on the order paper. And the order paper has this current proposed position from council, and then it has under number 3 a number of recommendations, 8 recommendations, or 9 recommendations. And I just assumed, as indeed I imagine the public would be that we would address any alterations or any positions as we worked our way through that. Look, I'm sure we all want the same outcome, but I'm worried that this becomes an alternative paper which the public had not seen, and which I personally didn't prepare direct response to because I didn't realise it was going to be tabled as an alternative position. So I don't know, maybe the CE could do. Well, no, even worse, it's been informally tabled because it's sitting here and the public haven't seen it, which in a way is even worse. So I just seek guidance from the CE on this. I'm happy. If I'm out of line, please tell me, but those are my concerns.
all got one. We'll just see if
This,
everybody.
Mr. Mayor, we're just trying to find a workable solution. And so what I propose to do is that I might read, I guess, the pertinent sections of what I've put forward and propose that as that be a amendment to the current version that is on the agenda paper. And then I'll abandon the attempt to try and reorder and resequence, even though I think that that's worthwhile. But for me, it's the high level statement at the front that's most critical. Would you like me to read that? I think I actually did email a copy of this ahead, so it could be put up on the screen potentially. Yeah.
So in terms of, we're then debating three basically. The Horowhenua District Council endorses the executive summary with Councillor Jennings, I would welcome that, thank you.
So would you like me to read that out now, or? Yep. So,
if you, what I would like to do is for you to maybe give your views overall on the package as well, but include your amendments to that executive summary at the same time, so that other councillors then understand what you are requesting to be changed.
So you're happy for me to kick off then? Excellent. As a politician, I'm about to get a bit political. So, look, every 3 years we elect a national government to be the servant of the individual and our communities. However, in my view, this government is increasingly acting as if it's taken its electoral mandate to become the master that rules us all. And has there been a time in recent history where we've seen our fundamental rights and freedoms become so constrained? Of course, much of this has been necessary in the midst of a global pandemic to keep our population safe. But alongside this, we have a government that has forged forward with significant reforms and proposals that fundamentally challenge our sense of democracy, localism, and fundamental rights. The proposed Three Waters reforms are a clear and present example of this approach. In my opinion, we have a government that is fixated on going down a deep centralisation path. This march towards a centralised command and control model is a direct attack and intrusion on localism and democratic accountability. I am very concerned about this, and I believe our communities should be too. The government, through its Three Waters reform program, is effectively saying to us all, and every other elected member around the country, that they do not trust you and that you are not competent to manage Three Waters. They are saying to our community, we know what is best for you, we don't need your opinion, we don't value your collective planning and input, and we can manage your assets better than you can. Ultimately, they don't trust our communities to practice democratic accountability. We are all aware that we do not have a fully formed proposal that is supported by clear and credible information. In my opinion, it would be foolish to provide more feedback than we are proposing to include in the draft letter in the absence of a more complete and accurate package of information. My position at this point is very clear. This council must be brave, bold and blunt in our response to the government and say, no, you must stop at this point and reconsider this attempt to erode local democracy. One of the key messages, in my opinion, in this letter is that there must be a strong message of pause, to pause the reform program. As it stands, the Three Waters reform program is a government policy development process which is a failure of epic proportions. To keep going as it currently is would produce bad law and poor outcomes, in my opinion. The government ultimately needs to read the room, listen to the feedback, reset, and give the sector time to put forward other credible and sensible options to achieve the government's broader objectives. Do away with the non-negotiables and focus on a good faith policy development process that is focused on solving problems and securing agreed change, rather than a fixed mindset on a particular solution and outcome. In my opinion, the second key message in our letter must be: do not mandate the proposed reforms or model, or you risk losing our trust and confidence and that of our communities. In my almost 2 years on council, no other issue has produced more contact with me. I've had tens and tens of people emailing, calling, and leaving messages on social media. The sentiment is overwhelmingly clear. Push back against the current scope of reforms. We do not want them. We need to be able to express our local perspective on tackling the challenges the government has identified. I therefore advocate for a much stronger response to the government on these reforms. Ultimately, I'm not against change, but I am not persuaded that the scale, means and model of change is fit for purpose, nor in the best interests of the community that I swore an oath to serve. As I've alluded, as things stand, I cannot support the proposed letter as it is, because it does, in a way, infer that we are on board with change if our specific concerns with the proposed model are addressed, and that's not my position. While I understand we must preserve our position and provide specific feedback on the proposed model, it does not mean we cannot take a firmer approach to our observations about the process that has led us to this point. There is still time to reset and reimagine what change in the Three Waters space looks like for us. The government, in my opinion, needs to give us the democratically elected representatives who are connected to our local communities the time and information to explore what best meets our future needs. And so for that reason, what I propose to do is to retain the first 2 paragraphs of the proposed letter, but then add 3 key paragraphs which sort of capture those concerns, and I'm happy to read that now if that is the preference. So after paragraph 2, I would add the paragraph as follows. Council understands that no formal decision is being sought at this point in time on whether Council supports government's reform package or otherwise. Despite this, it is apparent that the reform proposals are clearly at a stage where, to meaningfully provide feedback, Council have needed to consider the overarching merits of the reform proposal in order to provide honest and constructive feedback on the current design. Our initial high-level reaction to the proposed reforms are that, bullet 1, there is currently insufficient and inadequate information available to us to fully evaluate the proposal. Bullet 2, we consider the sequencing of Three Waters reforms ahead of finalisation of the government's own concurrent Future of Local Government review is ill-considered and inappropriate. Bullet 3, there are other credible and workable models and approaches that should have and could still be explored by government or councils themselves as an alternative to or enhancement to the current reform proposals. Bullet 4, we oppose any intention to mandate the reforms. Bullet 5, if the government intends to proceed with progressing and or further developing the current scope of reforms and design parameters, then key changes and additional features are essential to address a range of concerns and deficiencies identified by Council. And then finally, overall, we believe the government should immediately pause the current reform program to consider appropriate sequencing and allow for the investigation and development of other, more localised or regional collaborative or aggregated approaches to achieving better Three Waters outcomes.
Thank you. If there are, when elected members speak, it would be helpful if you also give some guidance in terms of that strengthening message that Councillor Jennings is asking for. Because if there is a consensus, then we will go back to that, but I'll read the table as I see fit and do that. So, Councillor Allen.
So, Mr Mayor, I start by saying that I am fully supportive of Councillor Jennings' amendment to the high-level statement. I support it. Just in terms of my view around the other issues, where I do disagree on one aspect of Councillor Jennings' impassioned speech, and I very much enjoyed it, is condemnation of the government as moving towards centralisation in many areas. And I note that centralisation is not always a dirty word, and give us a brief example, 20 DHBs, may they be gone by yesterday. One example where centralisation makes sense. So I don't want to tar the government's initiative on this issue with other initiatives that they're undertaking. That aside, Mr Mayor, I do want to acknowledge that the underpinning drivers around Three Waters, as espoused by the government, make good sense to me. So those drivers around saying that we as New Zealanders will have safe drinking water, that our storm and wastewater systems will be efficient and environmentally sensitive, I applaud those drivers and absolutely support the government's intent around that. The problem is the model itself. And the problem is that what they have put on the table, I think, is deeply flawed. Councillor Jennings has identified, I think, very well a number of those issues, but I just want to tease out a couple of things that concern me. The first is the order of business. There are three areas where the government is moving around local government. There's the area of the RMA, there is the Three Waters, and there is the whole thing about the future of local government. We have this Three Waters initiative sitting God knows where in the middle of the whole mix. And as this paper identifies, the paper that hopefully we'll endorse today, we need to line up the ducks. And the future of local government surely should be the first off the block. New Zealanders will not die from water poisoning if we pause and get the future of local government sorted out, be it 2 years, 3 years, however long, before we move into the unpacking of those other issues. The next thing I want to say is a real concern for me around the issue of privatisation. It has been addressed during the Q&A session prior to this. The worry I've got, it's already been identified by Councillor Jennings, 51% can change anything in Parliament, but the other issue is the larger the entity, the greater the risk of privatisation. Where there are 67 separate water systems and authorities, it is a lot harder for privatisation to occur, in my view, than when there is a large entity. Secondly, there's a whole issue of local voice. And it is unpacked in this document itself, but let's be clear about this. The current model will take the local voice out of the Three Waters discussion. It is a complex, multi-layered process under this model, and I cannot see for one moment how our locals will actually have a real say over how Three Waters look, not only at present, but under this really vital growth scenario that we're trying to deal with over the next number of years. There are opportunities to look at smaller models. There are already smaller models that do exist. You know, we know about Hawke's Bay and we know about Wellington Water. I'm not saying they're perfect. There are flaws, and I know about the balance sheet separation issues and so on, but there are still opportunities to look at smaller models. So finally, Mr Mayor, I just want to say this. Over the last 2 years, I've been privileged to be part of a council which has been unswerving in its determination to respond to the aspirations of the people and the communities of our district through the actions and decisions we've undertaken, most recently our long-term plan. And I believe without exception that the 11 faces around this table are unanimous in their commitment to localism. Local democracy, local solutions to local challenges. And so my challenge to central government, my question of central government is this. Are you absolutely convinced that your Three Waters model will enable the word local to continue to be an integral feature of local government? This is your initiative. It's your responsibility to answer this question, not only to the people of the Horowhenua, but to all other 66 councils across the length and breadth of New Zealand.
Thank you, Volkswagen. Councillor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, if you're wanting to have that voiced opinion that we support, a strengthening of the language, I'll lend my support to that. It's been heartening to hear over the last week or 10 days that the feel around the table is not out of line with our community. And as has been alluded to, that the conversations and the correspondence have aligned with our thinking. And sadly, I need to say that over this very compressed time of trying to get our heads around this, with a wish that come now I would be more informed, is not eventuated, because when we get to ask those deep questions, that information isn't available, or it hasn't been considered yet, or there's going to be a further announcement. It's really spooky that we are being pushed into this corner and just not armed with the information that we need. I want to talk about the drivers that have brought this proposal forward, and to suggest that local government don't share those same drivers. I think it's a real slight on how local government is being perceived or seen by central government, because to suggest that local government want to put out anything other than the highest possible standard within their means is derogatory at least. The challenge I'd like to put in front of central government, if they could wish up an entity to deliver any better than local government with the same straitjacket that is placed on local government, let's see it. But comfortably, the proposal being brought forward is with a whole new set of parameters that UNT can work within, and that is not the comfort that we enjoy. And as you've alluded to, Councillor Allen, this table over the recent years has, I think, never been armed with a higher understanding of what our assets are and how we can bring the Three Water service to our community at a responsible standard or affordability package. And it really irks me to think that we are being asked to give up all that by some other unknown who's able to play to a whole new set of rules. If only we were able to share that comfort, we would have a different story, and the nation would have a different story. So it is political, sadly, and it's come to the heart of local. And look, this conversation is going to be repeated around the 67 tables around the country, no doubt. And I'm heartened to hear what I'm reading around the country as to where others stand, because it gives me comfort that we're not out of line. And I think a strengthening of support to the language will have my support.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Mayor Burney, and I just want to indicate that I support a strengthening of the language in the letter of response that we sent to the government, because I've watched the initiation of the conversation around Three Waters prompted by central government through the DIA, and I've attended the workshops and looked at the information, and early on the language was strongly about opt-in and opt-out, and we were asked to engage on that basis. But when I attended the conference for Local Government New Zealand in July, there was a shift in that language, and opt-in and opt-out were not so much alluded to, but more this proposal of a reform that was about 4 entities that would take over the nationwide delivery of 3 waters. And of course then we know the further suite of initiatives that were announced. And Horowhenua would get $20 million worth of that. We were told water was unaffordable, significant upgrades were required for growth, there was concerns about degradation to the environment and ageing infrastructure, and those are messages that have come through, and we know we live with those on a daily basis. But this is this government's reform proposal, it's not ours, and it's their responsibility to talk to the people of New Zealand about it. They can't put that burden on us. So the inference of this proposal of reforms refers to the underinvestment in water infrastructure by councils over successive years. And the government's gone to a lot of attempts to demonstrate nationally to councils that water provision by local government will be unaffordable into the future, and that billions need to be invested, and that they're planning to create 6,000 more jobs as a result of the reforms. On top of that, they've stood up the new Crown entity water regulator, Taumata Arowai. And this entity is designed to oversee an expanded and strengthened drinking water regularity. And I concur with Councillor Allen. We want good drinking water, safe drinking water for our communities, and that's at the heart of our wellbeing for our communities. So their job is to ensure safe drinking water across all of New Zealand communities, Taumata Arowai. But they will also have oversight of the national performance of wastewater and stormwater networks. So what the government and people involved in these reforms are telling us, that's not business as usual, no more status quo with water delivery across New Zealand. We are also told in the information that the additional requirements for change in the drivers are about wastewater discharge standards changing, increase in costs and compliance and consenting and monitoring, and economic regulation driving compliance with investment of water infrastructure renewals. But it's very light on detail. And we know 3 water infrastructure is funded primarily from rates and has to continually be enhanced to meet growth and changes in community expectation and of course compliance. We as a council, we as elected members, know the burden felt with planning for the delivery of essential wellbeing services. And I talk about essential wellbeing services because the government tell us under reforms that we'll be able to focus more on wellbeings under the local government reforms, and yet I see water as essential to the wellbeing of a community. So we know the burden for planning for the delivery of this essential wellbeing service for our district. We know the burden felt when we deliver rates rises that are difficult for our community but only fulfil a part of what we know we'd like to achieve in water delivery. And of course we have the debt to prove that we have done the mahi and invested locally. We also know the importance we place on localism and delivery of services to our communities. And the conversation's been had with successive governments by local councils for years on how to better fund core infrastructure. We can go on at length about what's in front of us, but we need to deal here and now with this, and we need to give feedback, and I think it needs to be stronger. And no council is an island unto itself. We have boundaries that are really just lines on a map, and communities who align to us within these boundaries as we are the rating entity. But within these boundaries, we attempt to do right by our communities by planning and delivering. Maybe we can do better, and that conversation can be had about how we can collaborate and do better on the delivery of 3 waters. And we've outlined this in our feedback, and I think it's important that we don't deny we need to think differently. So while I do support the conversations about how 3 waters can be delivered more affordably, I support the feedback to government that is stronger and ask them to pause and consider carefully that feedback that's going to come from the councils across New Zealand. And while there is a case for change, the sweeping changes that devolve water from localism to centralism are, as I see it, insulting to councils such as ours who have listened and responded to their communities and in our case done significant work. That's why I support a stronger statement in our feedback to government.
Thank you, Bishop, and so I'm not going to take too long because it's been very well outlined by other councillors, and I think it seems to be that we certainly have very similar thoughts around this whole subject. Fundamentally, at the front end of this, there's two questions, and Councillor Mason touched on it. Is it mandatory or is it opt-in, opt-out? But we don't know. We simply don't even know that. How do we consult with our community if we don't know if we've got a choice? At the front end, I'd have thought that would have been the first thing the government would make clear. So what they're asking us to do is place millions of dollars of our community assets into the hands of unelected co-government entities that have no accountability to our communities, who have paid for those assets over many years. And the new entities, no doubt, will come with a much higher price tag that we will have no control over, community will have no control over, or no voice. We've touched on the lack of options that Councillor Jennings outlined it very well, the lack of options that are in front of us. There are models out there, again Councillor Jennings touched on, that we know work. When we talk about roading, our council's collaboration with Waka Kotahi NZTA around local roading improvements. And we see that every year in our community, and the difference and the contribution and great outcomes that makes for our communities. So there is models there. Why are they not being looked at? One can only surmise. Governments simply don't need to own these assets. They can contribute to higher standards by a collaborative model like the roading model that we see every year, by contributing funding to councils to get to these standards. They don't need to own these assets. One word that comes out of it, for me, loud and clear, and from other councillors around the table, is localism, that local voice, those local connections. Questions are, how will it work? We simply don't know how that will work. We just simply don't know. And I'll give you an example. Just after the prolonged rain event of recent times, I was contacted by some residents at the Foxer Beach community who had had some issues there had arisen. I went and paid a visit as a local representative to see what they were saying. Looked at the issues, contacted council officers. The very next day, council officers were on site, could see the issues in their own eyes, and 3 days later have come up with a fantastic solution, a very low-cost solution. Those residents were highly impressed by the service they got. Under this model, the massive entity C that we see that we are going to be involved in, how's that going to work? What voice will those residents have to get solutions in what was, to be fair, a pretty low-scale issue, but not low-scale to those residents because it was affecting their daily lives and their properties. What chance have they got under that massive entity C in this model to be heard? Again, we don't know. How do we talk to our communities about this? I support the strong wording as outlined by Councillor Jennings to be added to this, and simply can't support this reform where it currently sits. And again, consistent with the feeling around the table. That's right. Thank you.
Councillor Casons.
Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to support the strengthening of the wording that Councillor Jennings has put forward, and add some weight to the local voice that does need to be heard, and strengthen there also. Opt-in and out versus the mandatory side of things. I would absolutely hate to see this forced upon us, as our community would also, and discussions with our neighbours in regards to going forward with the Three Water and maybe how we could work together on that, I think would be a good conversation to have. And I did look into the Tasmanian water model, and really good reading. I don't know how many elected members got to look into that, but I think that would be a really good concept to look at also going forward. And I guess now it's a bit more of a continued waiting game. So that's all I have to add to that. Thanks.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank Councillor Jennings for reworking the front page and making clearer, I think, our stance on the main points is what he's doing. He's introducing it. He's saying that we haven't got enough information to make a decision. We certainly don't. And if you look at the rest of the document, we ask question after question after question, asking for clarification about how the whole thing's going to work. That we just really want the government to pause and listen to us and not rush this legislation through without getting it right, I guess. I can understand why there is a push for safer water, better environmental outcomes for sewage and stormwater. Some councils have not in the past necessarily made that their priority. Now we are at a stage in New Zealand where there's an awful lot of money going to have to go into upgrading infrastructure, and some councils just can't afford to do that. It's not to say that every council can't afford to do that. Some councils, including us, I think, are actually well on the road to actually meeting our obligations. Our problem is that it looks as though those obligations might increase, but the government's not telling us what those obligations are going to be yet. They don't seem to know themselves. So absolutely support that the government listens, that they pause what they're doing, that they look at alternative models that would probably work a lot better than 4 huge entities, and which would not be nearly so easy for privatisation to occur in the future. That's a worry with me too. Okay. So really just slow down and don't rush the whole thing. I'm just going through similar things that have happened with farming in the last year or so. Things have been pushed through without proper discussion and understanding of how it's all going to work in the end, and they need to get it right before it starts, not try to alter things when they find there's a whole lot of mistakes in the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you, Worship. I'd also like to start by supporting Councillor Jennings to change our statement and make it a lot stronger. There's not really a lot more I can say that hasn't been said by my fellow councillors, which makes me very proud actually, because the detail that Ashley, Nikki and Jacinda and the staff here have given us over the last 3 or 4 weeks since this is such a big decision, and everyone that's been in those workshops and gone through those briefings realise there's so much detail that there's just no one knows about. You cannot be making these sort of decisions on models that have just been pulled out of thin air, if you ask me, and there's just not enough. There's no detail to anything. Half the stuff they're talking about, they don't even know if it's absolutely ludicrous. So personally, we've got to really take a stance here, and I'd like to thank our officers for at least making us aware and giving us every bit of relevant information that they could. Even though it's lacking, it's not their fault, it's coming from Central. And so I 100% support it being stronger, and I concur with everything that every councillor has said here today. Thank you.
Councillor Tukapua.
Following Christine's suit, I'd also like to thank Councillor Jennings for doing some additional work. He did send us via email the document with track changes, quite impressive. So it sounds like we're all supportive. I definitely am with that additional piece in the front. Furthermore, I'd like to see and it really is just a changing of the order of things to further emphasise what we feel is. Anyway, he might speak to that after this round. I would support that too. to be honest, I'm struggling to keep my composure because I stood for council 2013 about Three Waters. That was actually the key, driver for me for standing, and our council has made significant progress in the last 5+ years. You heard earlier some of our ratings, B's, C's. Our drinking water is safe. We've got planned works that takes care of things, further improvements, addressing growth and the infrastructure needs there, but also like the environmental impacts that New Zealand are concerned about. We've made significant leaps and bounds around taking our wastewater out of rivers, and we might be one of few councils. I don't know how many others that have done the same, but there's just and these good stories, aren't out there enough. I'd have to say, but we've definitely done the hard yards and will continue to. And I just come back to that question, is this proposal, is this reform going to make Horowhenua better off? No, I deep down don't think so. I really don't think so. I know we don't have the detail of information, but on the face of it, every which theme we look at is just holes everywhere. And privatisation, which we addressed earlier and re-emphasised here by Councillor Allen around, the risk of takeover from 4 entities versus 67 councils. I mean, the likelihood of either or is, so it's safer in the hands of councils for future generations. And, I'm going to try and address the tension that no one has mentioned really in the room, and that is around this representation model with iwi or Māori, and it says in 4.8 that the government has undertaken multiple periods of engagement with iwi. No way. Certainly not happening here in the Horowhenua. I whakapapa to both Raukawa and Muopopo, and I tell you right now, they're little to none. They don't know about this. They don't understand this proposal. They don't know how they feed into this or a part of this. It's, it's a little bit rubbish. And so their engagement has very limited reach. And, like it is for us and for our community, that local voice is lost. I mean, imagine being caught up in this entity C where you're from Nelson, Marlborough, Blenheim, right up to Gisborne, and you're taking Wellington as far as Manawatu, and where you're stripping the local voice, and I just won't stand for it. So I just, even though this is not a decision about whether we opt in or opt out, I really can't support that. I'll give them one little, and that is the creation of this new water services regulator, that will hold to account or enforce these better standards so that, cases like Havelock North don't happen again. But, where was that before? It should have been in place, really. Or, and maybe we don't say it enough, but thank you to our CE management team, infrastructure, those that are here now and even recent years who've really got stuck in and supported our aspirations and the aspirations of our community to do better. We're not quite there. I've already alluded to it in our briefings around, stormwaters you know, something we need to work on, especially with the lake. You know, we hear it all the time from our community. And we have listened and we have committed to funds in the LTP in years 3 to 5, I think, to address that. And we will. And we don't need this centralised version to do it. And might I just add that, I don't know if it will still, I hope it stays, but in Appendix 1, which is in our agenda, page 31, I asked the question, the government consider alternative funding options for council, such as government returning to council the GST on the income received. You know, there's ways of co-funding and yeah, need I go on because I'm getting a nod over here. But thank you, Sam. Thank you to everyone for your efforts. I say to the government, halt, reorder these reforms, as you heard. You know, what's the future of local government first? And you might find yourself, out otherwise. Thank you.
Councillor Ketu, do you wish to add to the conversation?
Kia ora koutou. Kei te tangi au i konei e te wānanga o tātou. Kei te rongo au ngā te kōrero o te kawanatanga. Kei te kōrero ahau ki tō tātou iwi, e whāne ki te take hei mui a tātou. So I'm just saying that my heart is crying because of the way that the government have treated us. And as I hear and listen to the voice of our iwi, just as Pereira has stated, the iwi haven't been communicated with, even though that's the reason why I asked that question to Alex in one of our briefings. What is their experience in terms of the iwi being consulted, which told me that the iwi here in Horowhenua, they haven't been consulted. That's told me a lot. Kei te whiu atu ngā kōrero o tō tātou tupuna, ngā take hei mui a tātou. Ngā take o te tupunei is nā wai e tiaki te whenua, nā wai e tiaki te wai me tō tātou tangata. Who's going to take care of our people? Who's going to take care of the whenua? Who's going to take care of the waters? And māku e kia atu, he tangata, ko koe, kia tātou. That's one of the things that our tupuna have said, is that it's us, it's you, it's all of us. They're going to take care of the things that are here on the whenua. So some of the issues that have come up out of this Three Water review and this document, kare au e whakai, nā tu me, kare e wānanga ki tō tātou kaitiaki o te rohe nei. There's not enough information that we as councillors, and we've been saying that to all of ourselves, where is that information and how are we supposed to give a guide to our hapu, our iwi, our communities, our families, if we don't know, as the councillors, don't know what our direction is? How can we give give guidance to our communities if the information is not on the table so that we can make good decisions on behalf of our people. And I concur with my rest of the councillors and the information that our officers have been giving to us as much as they can. It's been awesome, awesome documents that they've been writing for us and making sure that we understand what's going on and how we can go about making good decisions on behalf of our communities. I think about some of the things that we as our community, all of our communities, in terms of our district, we've been trying to do a good thing with our partners, iwi, and ourselves, our communities, to be able to do the best thing for our three waters. And I go back, step back a little bit, 2013, when we were trying to make sure that we were going to making good decisions on the Shannon wastewater, and this council made some good decisions around that. There were formed some good, excellent partners with the iwi. And those are the sorts of kōrero that we need to hear. That's what we haven't had that opportunity to be able to talk to our communities and also to understand, what decisions we're making for ourselves going forward. Ia te tikanga o tātou, kei te whakaai au I pāne ki te kōrero a waha, a Sam, tēnā koe Sam, mō te kōrero ki a mātou, ki te whakanui te kōrero o tātou tai atu ki te kawanatanga. Just to say thank you, Sam, for your kōrero, being able to give some essence and some clarity and some of the strengthening of our kōrero that needs to go out to our government. Nō reira e te whānau, tēnei te mihi aro ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora.
Kia ora, Robert. Thank you. If I can have the indulgence of the meeting, and I know we are probably impinging on our finance meeting shortly, but this is a topic that deservedly needs the input from each individual councillor, and can I just acknowledge all of you in terms of the response that you've made. In some ways it's a bit disconcerting and a bit alarming that everybody's agreeing with each other in terms of where we sit. And but I think that's a reflection of the strength of what we have put into making sure that we understand and try to reflect what our community is telling us. Look, on the face of it, for me, Three Waters reform should be a no-brainer. Improved water regulations to ensure quality delivery of Three Waters, greater investment in infrastructure, less cost to councils, less debt for councils, ratepayers better off, everybody wins. Ratepayers, councillors and the country. Unfortunately, that's not how everyone sees it. No one disagrees with the premise that this country deserves and wants better Three Water services. The ideal is great. How we get there is a totally different debate, and unfortunately this debate has turned into a political and ideological debate rather than focusing on the positive outcomes that could eventually result. I would love to be able to actually be in a position to support these proposals, because if that ideal was created, then Horowhenua ratepayers could be better off in the future. At every long-term plan and annual plan, there is always the chorus of submitters who plead for us not to increase rates, don't increase debt, don't spend on anything but the essential. These reforms could actually make a difference in that space. But the reality is that while government know their start and end points, there's very little confidence in how we get there and how, in the end, that these entities will be able to deliver on that ideal. There is a vacuum that has been created by the lack of information, the lack of rigour on many of the assumptions, the lack of detail on many of the other issues like ownership, the lack of community consultation, how transition will work, how prioritisation for the future will work, and how localism will be recognised. Well, today is not about opting in or opting out of the reforms. It is about sending a clear message to the government that there are many questions that need to be answered before we can determine where we stand formally. My plea to the government is that they don't push these reforms without giving us those answers, and also give us the time to bring our communities with us to understand the reforms. I am supportive of the general nature of the feedback we are giving, although I completely agree with the strengthening of the front-end message that there should be a pause in the program. Our approach has been up to this stage measured and neutral, and I think we need to take and acknowledge the efforts that have gone in from officers in terms of getting us to this stage today. The fact that we sit around this table and basically all agree, I think is a testament to the amount of time and effort that has gone in. And I'd also like to acknowledge Chris Purchase from Tonkin and Taylor in that acknowledgement, because I think he has helped tremendously in getting us to this point. We know there is a long way to go before either what decision is being made by Cabinet, and that we hope will come to us shorter rather than later, so that we can actually bring our community with us. Thank you all for your input to this. It has been most encouraging to see some of the responses and the thought that has gone into those responses, so appreciate it greatly. So I suppose now we need to formally adopt the recommendations, and I'm hoping that the Chief Executive is going to hand me a recommendation that will take into account.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think we may need a motion that is along the lines of adding the wording that I proposed to the overview section, and then unless other people have got suggestions in terms of other changes to the exec summary or the other sections, we could take that in block. And then we'd probably also need a motion that would authorise the Chief Executive and staff to make some editing suggestions in order for ease of readability, flow, if there's some necessary reordering or that kind of thing. Yeah.
So, while not wanting Councillor Jennings to repeat what he asked, is everyone comfortable with the wording pretty much substantially that he proposed? So 3.3 is that the Horowhenua District Council endorses the executive summary with changes.
So I think sorry, I just exchanged an email with the Deputy Chief Executive. I think the concern is that the change that I put forward was actually to the overview, the front end of the document. So that's not actually not under the heading of executive summary. So I think staff just want some clarity that the wording I proposed is that there is actually a motion that specifically adds that text into the document. Is that correct? Yeah.
Ask the Deputy Chief Executive.
Yes, so the concern that I raised there, Councillor Jennings, was that as it's currently proposed with the recommendations, we've started at executive summary. The discussion that's just occurred amongst selected members, Councillor Jennings read out 2 paragraphs actually of what is a complete overview section. And so what I had queried was, is it that Council are wanting to take the overview section, so that is in the document that Councillor Jennings has provided, from Dear Minister all the way through to the last sentence, which is the government's next decisions will of course determine what next steps are taken by Council, and that in block replaces the section in the report that councillors have received, page 18, which starts Dear Minister, and then ends at direction will determine how we move forward, and then the executive summary follows, because otherwise your discussion has only been about 2 paragraphs. However, you've all referred to accepting the strengthening and spoken to that section in block. So we just want the clarity, because otherwise we're only pasting 2 paragraphs in, and I don't believe that would reflect your discussion.
So for clarity, I'll assist and say that I'll move that you accept page 1 and a bit of 2, which was from Dear Minister to the final sentence reading, the government's next decision will of course determine what steps are taken next by council.
Can I offer an alternate? So can I just note one thing for the record around the council table, and also just for those that are listening. A fair part of what Councillor Jennings has proposed is largely the same wording as we've currently got, apart from some reordering of some of the themes. And I'll just note those themes, if I could, through you, Your Worship. So the themes that were in the original report read like this, in this order: community voice and support, order of reforms, representation and governance, supporting growth and infrastructure, alternate options for delivery, transition and delivery, growing and supporting economy. Now, I'm assuming that the reordering that Councillor Jennings has put in his proposition is on the basis of the priorities. So in order, he's got order of reforms, alternate options delivery, community voice and support, representation and governance, supporting growth infrastructure, supporting and growing and supporting our economy, an additional theme called service delivery, and transition delivery. But essentially the wording in those themes is exactly the same. Apart from one sentence that you have removed from the appendix, which was the point that Councillor Tukapua raised around the did the government consider alternate funding options for the council, such as government returning to council the GST on an income received. So that is not included in Councillor Jennings' appendix. So I'm just trying to get to a point here. And the order of the executive summary has also been reprioritised, but essentially the wording is the same to what's in the original report. So the suggestion from me is that the council resolves to adopt or to accept the alternate version of response to the government on Three Waters reform. And that's essentially the revised document that's been tabled by Councillor Jennings. But just noting that it's yes, it has been enhanced at the beginning in the executive summary, but the order of the report has changed around on the basis of prioritising. If I can maybe, that's...
Happy to confirm that's exactly that it was intended to focus on the high level themes first, and then focus on the more specific aspects of the model that we've been asked for feedback on. So just trying to separate it into those. Yeah.
So you could resolve to adopt the alternate version of response to government on Three Waters reform as has been tabled this evening. Subject to the comment around the last sentence in the appendix.
I am conscious of Councillor Allen's earlier comments right at the beginning of the meeting, but I would be happy to move that with the addition of question 5, which was the question that had been raised by Councillor Tukapua.
Councillor Bush.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Are there any
questions? Councillor Allen, are you comfortable with that? Or will you say give your piece in your... Yeah.
I've already said
Yes,
what
okay.
I feel about it, but
Thank you.
so be it.
All right. So the item is up for discussion and debate now. Councillor Tukupa.
So I support this version, it's essentially the same apart from the piece up front that was read out earlier, and we all agree that we like the strength of that and the order and priority of that. And so with what you've articulated, David, around those things or the wording that exists is still the same. We've just moved the things around in order, and you will put back number 5 in the appendix, which I raised earlier. Very much support it. Great.
Thank you. Councillor Jennings, as the mover of the recommendation, would you like to close this?
I was just going to make one very simple comment, which is to thank the staff in preparation for the base document. The lawyer and me came over me, and I tinkered with the document. And but to be honest, the bones and all of the key themes, as the chief executive has outlined, have been perfectly captured in terms of the discussion that we've had. And I wanted to express my appreciation for all the hard work that has gone into essentially putting together the substantive part of the document. And I've just come in at the front and put some strong language. So thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Mason.
And just one last thing I hope reassure Councillor Allen that the recommendations talk about with or without changes, and we're essentially taking a document with changes, but I hope that for the community that have looked at the order paper and looked at the recommendations and the letter that's provided, that the predominance of approaches to us have been asking us to give strong feedback about these reforms, and that we've listened and done that today, and that this amended proposal is a document essentially the same but with changes as is on the order paper, so I feel comfortable with that.
Can I just add one final 3.11 to this recommendation, that the Chief Executive is authorised to correct minor errors prior to the document being finalised and sent to the government?
Happy to move that.
Happy to move and seconder. Councillor Bishop, thank you. Okay, so the motion is on the table. All those in favour? Against? Sorry? Sorry.
So just before you put the motion, could we add another question to the appendix, asking that the funding of the water services, is it intended to only bill people that use those services? There's the clarity. I mean, I do hear that in other countries, I think England, that people who do not use the water services are billed anyway, and it could be on capital value. We don't know how they're going to achieve keeping the bills down for ratepayers now. They're going to say, we're going to keep your services bills lower. Is that because they're going to start spreading water and wastewater and stormwater across people that don't actually use those services? I just want clarity that that won't happen.
Sorry, could you just detail that question, because
Can the government clarify who will be contributing to the water services costs? Will it only be?
I think that's probably all you need to say. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just if I can just add to what Councillor Mitchell is alluding to. and it's on the basis of the Horowhenua perspective at the moment. It's only those people that are actually connected to our water and wastewater. There is a crossover between with stormwater, but largely, well, essentially, only those people that are connected to water and wastewater through the council system actually pay for it. So people that are living in our rural communities do not pay for that water and wastewater service. So it's in that context that I think Councillor Mitchell wants clarification what might happen going forward. Now, that's not to say that other councils do it differently to us, because that's their ability to do that under the Roading Powers Act, to do that. But in our situation, we don't. So that's what I think Councillor Mitchell is seeking clarification on.
Can I just ask, is everyone comfortable that that question gets added to the document? Feedback?
Yes.
Seeing no responses, okay. So duly noted by the officers, I suspect. In that case, are there any further matters? I'll declare the meeting closed. Sorry, I have put the motion in. Oh, I was halfway through putting the motion when the question came and I thought I'd had a response. So, all those in favour? Against? Councillor Allen. Thank you, duly noted. Thank you to the officers involved and thank you everybody for their input. We will take a 10-minute break and resume the finance meeting at 4:30.